Why did the room go quiet the moment she stepped inside? It wasn't because she was late. It wasn't because she was loud. It was because she didn't look like what they expected. 300 Navy SEALs filled the auditorium, bodies relaxed but alert, voices low with confidence earned the hard way. They had survived deserts, mountains, cities where the walls bled gunfire. They trusted size, speed, violence, and the men beside them. Then she walked in. Lieutenant Kira Blackwood moved with no wasted motion, no hesitation, no announcement. Her boots touched the mat like she belonged there, because she did, but no one believed it yet. She could feel it. The weight of doubt. The way silence can judge louder than words. She had known this moment would come, known it since she was 6 years old, standing between white headstones while rifles cracked the sky behind her. Known it since a man with weathered eyes pressed a Ranger tab into her small palm and told her that strength wasn't volume, it was control. Now, decades later, that same lesson sat against her chest beneath her uniform, unseen but present. Ignored, measured, dismissed. She stood at the edge of the mat while laughter rolled through the seats, not cruel, not angry, just certain. Certainty was dangerous. Certainty made people sloppy. She breathed in. Slow. Steady. She wasn't here to be liked. She was here to be precise. The senior instructor spoke her name and heads turned. Some leaned forward. Others crossed their arms. A few smiled like this was entertainment. Then one of them stood. He was enormous, confident, comfortable being the loudest thing in the room. And when he spoke, the words cut straight through her chest, not because they were sharp, but because they were familiar. She didn't answer him. She removed her cover, placed it carefully aside, unclipped the thin chain from her neck. The Ranger tab caught the light briefly before she set it down. Only then did she look at him. Calm eyes. No anger. No fear. The laughter didn't stop, but it changed, because something about her stillness unsettled them. And somewhere deep in the room, an older man with crossed arms leaned forward slightly, not to intervene, but to watch. Kira had waited her entire life for rooms like this. She could wait a few seconds more. Because the truth was simple, even if they didn't know it yet. She wasn't here to prove she was strong. She was here to show them what control really looked like. What happens when confidence realizes it has been miscalculated. The man across from her rolled his shoulders once, slow and deliberate, like someone stepping into a familiar ritual. He wasn't trying to intimidate her. He didn't need to. His size did that for him. Years of training, years of winning, years of being the one people stepped aside for. Kira could feel the room leaning toward him. She didn't look at the crowd. She watched his center of gravity, the way his weight shifted slightly forward, the tension building in his dominant shoulder before the strike even existed. This was the part no one ever noticed. Commander's voice cut clean through the air, permission given, rules stated, medical standing by. The silence that followed was heavy, expectant. The man moved. Fast, hard, a strike meant to end the question before it finished forming. The kind of punch that had dropped grown men in training and worse men overseas. Kira didn't think. She never did in moments like this. Her body answered before thought could interfere. A half step. A redirection instead of resistance. Contact that didn't stop the force, only borrowed it. The punch passed her face by inches. In the same breath, her hand closed around his wrist. Not tight, precise. Her hips turned, transferring momentum through structure instead of muscle. The technique was old, boring, even, written in margins of forgotten manuals, practiced thousands of times in empty rooms. The joint reached its limit, and then went just beyond it. The sound was wrong. Not loud, sharp, final. The man dropped to his knees, shock arriving a heartbeat before pain. The room inhaled as one body. Someone cursed under their breath. Someone else stood without realizing they had. Kira didn't let go. She controlled the fall, controlled the pressure, controlled the outcome. "Don't move," she said quietly, voice steady despite the rush pounding in her ears. "You're injured." Her words weren't triumph. They were responsibility. Medics rushed forward, boots slapping against the mat. The man's face had gone pale now, eyes wide, not with fear but confusion. He looked up at her like the rules had changed without telling him. "How?" he whispered. She knelt beside him, lowering herself to his level, keeping her voice low so only he could hear. "You were angry," she said. "Anger tells a story before the body finishes it. I listened." That was all. She stood as they lifted him away, stepping back to give space, giving dignity where she could have taken it. The room didn't applaud. It didn't know how. 300 men sat frozen, recalibrating something internal and uncomfortable. They had seen violence before. This wasn't that. This was control. The instructor spoke, the admiral stood, words followed, explanations, principles. Kira barely heard them. Her hands were steady now, but her chest felt tight. Not fear, something else. Relief, maybe. Or grief. She hadn't wanted to hurt him. That truth sat heavy. She never did. But she knew this moment mattered. That restraint only meant something when power existed beneath it. Another name was called. This one moved differently. Lighter, faster, eyes alert, calculating. The kind of fighter who believed speed was the great equalizer. Kira felt the shift in the room, a new hope forming, a new story they wanted to tell themselves. Maybe the first was luck. She nodded once. They circled. His feet barely touched the mat, bouncing, testing. Feints came sharp and clean. Professional, he wanted reaction, wanted her to chase. She didn't. Her breathing slowed instead. Ignored. Patient. Present. The first jab cut air. The second almost brushed her cheek. The third came with commitment. That was when she stepped inside. Too close. His advantage disappeared in an instant. Speed meant nothing when there was nowhere to go. She took his wrist, rotated, dropped her weight. He felt the trap before it fully formed, already tapping as the lock tightened. 4 seconds, maybe less. She released immediately. He stared at her, stunned, then laughed once under his breath, not mocking, amazed. "You didn't rush," he said. "No," she replied. "I waited." He shook his head as he stepped away. "That was on me." The room changed again. Not louder. Quieter. Thinking. The next man was heavier, ground fighter, confident in gravity and mass. He said it plainly, if he took her down, he would keep her there. Kira nodded. They collided harder this time. The impact drove air from her lungs. She tasted copper for a second as the mat slapped her back. Weight crushed down, deliberate, suffocating. This was where doubt returned, where spectators leaned forward for different reasons. Her ribs screamed. She framed, shifted, survived. Seconds stretched, pressure built, breathing narrowed. Then an opening. Small, painful, perfect. She bridged, angled, locked her legs around his neck with precision that had nothing to do with strength. His breath caught. His confidence drained fast. He tapped. She released. He rolled away, coughing, staring at the ceiling like it had betrayed him. Kira stood slower this time. Her side burned. Something wasn't right. She pressed her arm in tight, hiding the pain from the room if not from herself. She could have stopped. No one would have blamed her. But she knew something they didn't. Stopping early leaves questions alive. And unanswered questions breed doubt. The next opponent came hard. Aggressive, punishing, strikes aimed low, then high, then at her injured side. She took some of it, couldn't avoid all of it. Her body absorbed what technique couldn't deflect. Pain became background noise. She waited. When he overcommitted, she stepped into the danger instead of away from it, took the hit she could afford, delivered the response that ended it. When she pinned him, holding a strike inches from his face, the message landed harder than any blow. "Dead," she said softly. He nodded. No argument. She stood and almost didn't. Her legs wavered. Her shoulders screamed. Adrenaline was the only thing holding the structure together now. Still, one more was called. This time a blade. Training knife, rubber, but everyone in the room knew the truth. Knives don't forgive mistakes. The man holding it looked uneasy. Respect had replaced skepticism, and that made this harder. Kira met his eyes. "So don't lose it," she said. He attacked carefully at first, then faster, slashes, stabs, changes in grip. She disarmed him once. Then again. On the third exchange, she landed wrong. Pain exploded through her shoulder, bright and nauseating. Her arm went weak instantly. The room stirred. Medical moved. She waved them off. One more. This time she had one arm. One chance. The knife came in straight, professional, mercifully aimed away from her injury. She didn't retreat. She stepped forward, closed distance, committed everything she had left into timing and leverage, and faith in training older than any of them. She threw him. The knife skidded away. She pinned his arm and placed the blade gently against his throat. "Dead." The word echoed. Then her strength gave out. She dropped to one knee, breathing hard, vision narrowing, pain finally demanding payment. For 3 heartbeats, the room was silent. Then a chair scraped. The first man, the one with the broken arm, stood. He raised his good hand in salute. The room followed. 300 men on their feet. Not cheering. Acknowledging. Kira looked up, tears blurring her vision, unsure when they had come. Somewhere in the back, an old instructor nodded once. No applause. Just respect. And in that moment, she understood something her father had tried to teach her long ago. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout. Sometimes it doesn't even stand. Sometimes it kneels. And the world rises to meet it. Why did the silence after the applause feel heavier than the fight itself? Kira sat on the edge of the mat while medical worked on her shoulder, the noise of the room fading into something distant and hollow. Pain had a way of narrowing the world. Every breath pressed against her ribs like a reminder she couldn't ignore. Still, her face stayed composed, not because it didn't hurt, but because pain had never been the thing she feared most. It was doubt. Not theirs, hers. As the medics tightened the wrap and eased her arm into a sling, she stared straight ahead, eyes unfocused. The moment had passed. The demonstrations were over. What remained now was judgment, the quieter kind that lingered after adrenaline faded. Had she gone too far? Had she crossed the line between proving a point and becoming the point? The crowd slowly began to disperse, conversations low and thoughtful. Gone was the laughter, gone were the jokes. In their place were questions, calculations. Respect earned the hard way. She felt it without looking. Commander Hayes approached first, stopping just outside her personal space. He didn't speak immediately. He just studied her the way instructors study recruits after something breaks or changes. "You okay, Lieutenant?" he asked finally. "I will be," she said, honest, controlled. He nodded once. "You don't have to be made of steel to teach steel," he said quietly. "Remember that." Before she could respond, footsteps approached from the front row. The Admiral. Rear Admiral Merrick moved slower than the others, not from age alone but from habit. The kind of man who never rushed decisions because rushing had once nearly ended the world. He stopped in front of her, hands clasped behind his back, eyes sharp but not unkind. "You proved what I needed to see," he said. Kira met his gaze. "Sir, with respect, I wasn't trying to prove anything." His eyebrow lifted slightly. "That," he replied, "is exactly why you did." He turned to the medic. "She goes to imaging now." That wasn't a suggestion. As they helped her to her feet, Kira caught movement in the back of the room. An older man stood alone near the exit, arms crossed, posture rigid in a way that ignored age. He hadn't applauded, hadn't saluted. He had watched. Their eyes met briefly. He nodded once. Her throat tightened. Master Chief Dalton Vaughn didn't wait for her. He turned and walked out, disappearing into the bright California morning. The medical facility smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. Kira sat still as X-rays clicked and machines hummed, her thoughts louder than the equipment. The doctor spoke calmly. Grade 2 separation, cracked ribs, nothing life-altering, everything painful. 6 weeks, he said, minimum. She nodded, jaw tight. 6 weeks felt like a lifetime when momentum mattered. As the corpsman stepped out to file reports, the door opened again. Dalton Vaughn entered without knocking. He looked exactly the same as he had 20 years ago and completely different at the same time. More lines, less hair, the same eyes that missed nothing. For a long moment, he said nothing. "Then, your father would have told you to stop after the first injury." Kira huffed a quiet breath. "He would have told me not to embarrass myself in front of 300 operators." Vaughn's mouth twitched, almost a smile, true. He pulled a chair closer and sat, joints protesting softly. "You scared them," he said, not accusatory, observational. "They needed that," she replied. "They needed understanding," he corrected. "Fear just opens the door." Kira looked down at her wrapped shoulder. "Fear listens. Only if you give it direction." Silence stretched between them, familiar and comfortable. Finally, Vaughn reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. The cover was faded, the edges soft from decades of handling. "I carried this through Panama," he said. "Then Iraq, Afghanistan. Your father wrote in it before Mogadishu." He placed it gently in her lap. Her breath caught. "You don't give things like this away," she said. "You do when it's time," he replied. "You taught today, now you'll teach again on a larger scale." Kira swallowed. "I don't know if they'll listen tomorrow." "They already are," Vaughn said. "They just won't admit it yet." He stood, resting a hand briefly on her uninjured shoulder. The gesture was light, respectful. "Control," he said. "You showed them control. Never forget that's the lesson." Then he left. 2 days later, Admiral Merrick's office. Kira stood at attention, sling stark against her uniform. The Admiral reviewed documents without speaking, letting silence do its work. "Lieutenant Blackwood," he said at last, "effective immediately, you are appointed Acting Chief Close Quarters Combat Instructor for Naval Special Warfare Command." The words landed heavier than any blow she'd taken. "Sir," she began. "This is not ceremonial," he interrupted. "This is operational curriculum development, instructor training, oversight." He leaned back slightly. "There will be resistance." "I expect it," she said. "Good, because doubt doesn't bother me," Merrick replied. "Stagnation does." She nodded once. "I won't let this become a performance." "I know," he said. "That's why you're here." Dismissed. The first morning of training arrived quietly. No ceremony, no crowd. Just 47 SEALs standing on a mat, boots aligned, eyes forward. Some familiar faces, some new, all waiting. Kira stepped in front of them, pain still present but managed. The Ranger tab rested beneath her shirt, warm against her skin. She didn't raise her voice. "You're not here to be impressed," she said. "You're here to learn restraint, precision, survival." She paused, letting the words settle. Strength fades, control adapts. They listened. Not because she was loud, not because she was intimidating, but because she had already paid the cost of being ignored. As they began, she caught a glimpse of one of the newer operators struggling, frustration building. She stepped in, corrected his stance with a light touch, adjusted his angle by inches. His eyes widened as the technique worked. Understanding replaced effort. That was the real victory. Not breaking arms, breaking assumptions. Hours later, as the room emptied, Kira sat alone on the mat, breathing slow, steady. The pain was still there. The work was just beginning. She touched the Ranger tab beneath her shirt. Legacy wasn't something you inherited. It was something you chose to carry, carefully, deliberately, so others wouldn't have to carry it alone. And for the first time since she was 6 years old, standing between white headstones, Kira felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not pride. Purpose. Why did the room feel heavier when no one was watching anymore? The mat was empty now, quiet in a way that only places of discipline ever are, where echoes of effort linger long after bodies leave. Kira remained seated long after the last boots disappeared down the corridor, her back against the cool wall, sling resting awkwardly against her ribs. When movement finally stopped, pain stepped forward like it had been waiting its turn. She welcomed it. Pain was honest. Pain didn't pretend. What unsettled her was the silence that followed purpose, the absence of a clear next move. She had crossed a line, earned authority the hard way, and now she had to decide what kind of leader that made her. The notebook Vaughn had given her lay open in her lap. She hadn't read it yet, hadn't trusted herself to. The ink inside carried voices she wasn't ready to hear. Instead, she traced the worn edge with her thumb, grounding herself in the weight of it. "Control adapts," he'd said. She wondered if she had. The first week blurred into long days and careful nights. She learned the rhythm of the instructors, who challenged quietly, who resisted openly, who watched from corners with folded arms and locked expressions. Resistance didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it smiled and nodded and waited for mistakes. She made a few, corrected them, owned them. That mattered. On the third day, a junior instructor pushed back during a technique review. Not loudly, not disrespectfully, just enough to test the boundary. "That's not how we've done it," he said. Kira met his eyes. "That's true." He waited for more. "It's how we'll do it now." No threat, no lecture, just a line drawn with calm hands. He nodded, uncertain but willing. Later, she found him practicing alone, repeating the adjustment until it settled into muscle memory. She didn't interrupt. Some lessons needed privacy to take root. At night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, shoulder throbbing, ribs aching, thoughts circling places she usually kept sealed. Her father's voice surfaced uninvited. Not commands, questions. "Why this path? What will it cost you? What are you willing to lose?" She had answers once, clean ones, purpose-shaped. Now they felt heavier, more human. On the 7th night, she opened the notebook. The handwriting shifted throughout, some neat and measured, others rushed and jagged, written under stress or fire or exhaustion. Entries spoke of doubt more than courage, of restraint failing, of choices made too fast and paid for too slow. One page was folded down. Her father's writing. "If you're reading this, it means you survived long enough to wonder if it was worth it." She closed the book. Her breath hitched despite her effort to keep it steady. Worth was a dangerous word. The next morning, she walked into the training hall early and found someone already there. The man whose arm she'd broken sat alone on the mat, cast heavy and white against his fatigues. He stood when he saw her, stiff and uncertain. "Lieutenant," he said. "Kira," she corrected. He nodded, adjusting. "I wanted to say I didn't understand that day. I thought you were trying to make an example." "And now," she asked gently, "now I think you were trying to prevent one." She studied him for a long moment. He looked different without the armor of confidence, smaller maybe, or just more real. "I'm cleared for modified duty," he added. "They said I could observe." "You can do more than that," she replied, "if you're willing." He swallowed. "I am." She handed him a training blade. "Then let's start with footwork." They worked quietly. No audience, no pressure, just repetition and correction and the slow rebuilding of trust, his in himself and hers in the process. Word spread. Not loudly, but effectively. By the second week, more operators stayed after hours, asked questions they hadn't asked before, not about how to win, but how to survive mistakes, how to keep control when adrenaline tried to take it. Kira answered honestly. Sometimes the answer was, "I don't know yet." That earned more respect than certainty ever could. Then the call came. An incident overseas. Not active combat, training support for an allied unit that had lost 2 instructors in an accident. Temporary assignment. Advisory role only. Merrick's voice was calm when he delivered it. "You're not cleared for field operations." "I know," she said. "You'll observe, advise, nothing more." "I understand." He studied her through the screen. "Do you?" She paused. "I do." That wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough. The flight was quiet, long. She watched clouds slide beneath the wing, each one carrying the weight of distance and responsibility. Her shoulder ached dully, reminding her of limits she couldn't ignore. When they landed, heat wrapped around her like a held breath. The base was smaller than she expected, tired, the kind of place that ran on habit and hope. The unit she was advising greeted her with politeness edged by grief. 2 empty spots in formation. 2 names no one said aloud yet. She didn't try to fill the silence. She stood with them, listened, let it exist. During the first demonstration, she stayed back, arms crossed, watching posture and timing and hesitation. She saw fear hiding beneath professionalism, the kind that comes when trust has been shaken. A trainee froze mid-movement, not from lack of knowledge, but from memory. Kira stepped forward without thinking, then stopped. Advisory role. Her hand curled into a fist at her side. Control adapts. She caught the trainee's eye, spoke softly. "Breathe, you're safe, start again." He did. The moment passed. That night, she wrote in the notebook for the first time. "I thought control meant distance, but sometimes it means staying close enough to see when someone's about to fall." The following day, an exercise went wrong. Not catastrophic, but close. A miscommunication, a mistimed movement, the kind of small error that becomes something else if ignored. Kira moved instinctively, stepping between 2 trainees, redirecting, grounding the moment before it escalated. No one was hurt. Afterward, the lead instructor pulled her aside. "You broke protocol." She nodded, "Yes." "You weren't authorized." "I know." He studied her, "But you were right." She didn't answer. That night, sleep didn't come easily. The what-ifs crowded in, the weight of almosts. She sat outside the barracks under a sky full of stars that didn't care about rank or rules. Her phone buzzed. A message from Vaughn. "Proud of you. Remember, restraint isn't absence. It's presence without ego." She closed her eyes. Back home weeks later, she returned to the mat changed in ways she couldn't fully name. The sling was gone. The pain lingered, but softer, manageable. The program had evolved while she was gone. The instructors had adapted it, made it theirs. That mattered more than authorship. On the final day of the cycle, she stood before the group, not elevated, not separated, just present. "You'll forget some of this," she said. "That's human." They listened. "But what you shouldn't forget is that control isn't weakness. It's the choice you make when you could do more, and decide not to." She looked around the room. "At some point, every one of you will have the power to break something, or someone. When that moment comes, remember, you're defined not by what you can do, but by what you choose to leave intact." She stepped back. The room stayed quiet, not because they were unsure, but because they understood. Later, alone again, Kira returned the notebook to her locker. She didn't close it this time. Legacy wasn't a straight line. It curved. It corrected. It waited for hands steady enough to carry it forward. And for the first time, she believed hers might be. Why did the hardest test arrive only after everything finally seemed steady? The message came at dawn, quiet and unremarkable in the way that important things often are. No sirens, no urgency in the tone, just a request routed through channels she hadn't touched in years. Observer status, joint exercise, high visibility unit. Kira read it twice. Her shoulder was cleared now, mostly, strong enough to work, strong enough to teach, strong enough on paper to deploy, but only in limited scope, the kind of limits that looked clean in reports and blurred fast in reality. She stared at the screen longer than necessary, feeling the familiar tightening in her chest. Not fear, responsibility. She accepted. The base they flew into sat against a stretch of land that felt unfinished, like the world had stopped mid-thought. Dust hung in the air. Heat pressed down without apology. The operators assigned to the exercise moved with practiced ease, confidence reinforced by recent success and constant scrutiny. High-visibility units came with high expectations and high egos. Kira felt it immediately. The sideways looks, the polite nods that ended too quickly, the careful neutrality that hid questions no one wanted to ask out loud. Why is she here? She didn't correct them, didn't explain. She had learned that justification invited debate. Presence, on the other hand, spoke for itself, eventually. The briefing room was crowded, voices overlapping as plans layered over each other. Maps, timelines, contingencies. The exercise was complex but controlled. No live fire, no unknown variables. Supposedly. Kira stood near the back, arms folded, listening more than watching. Patterns revealed themselves when you didn't rush to interrupt them. One operator dominated the room, charismatic, decisive, the kind of leader people followed without realizing it. He spoke fast, confidently, smoothing over concerns with certainty instead of clarity. She noticed what he didn't say. A weather shift dismissed as unlikely. A communication relay assumed instead of confirmed. A margin for error treated like an inconvenience. She made a note. When the briefing ended, the lead instructor approached her. "Any concerns?" She hesitated, not because she didn't have them, but because she understood timing. "Not yet," she said. "I'd like to observe the first run." He nodded, relieved. Agreement was easier than adjustment. The exercise began smoothly, too smoothly. Kira watched from the command post, eyes flicking between feeds, tracking movement and spacing. The operators moved with precision, executing exactly what they had rehearsed. Then the wind changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Dust thickened, visibility dropped. One relay crackled, then went quiet. The dominant voice in the room kept talking, filling space, pushing momentum forward. Kira felt it then. That familiar tightening, the one that whispered, "This is where mistakes start." She stepped forward. "We need to pause," she said calmly. The room barely registered her at first. The leader waved a hand, eyes still on the screen. "We're within parameters." Not anymore, she replied, louder this time, still controlled. He turned, irritation flashing. Lieutenant, we're mid-execution. And losing clarity, she said. Your relay's compromised. It's static. It's silence, she corrected. There's a difference. The room stilled. This was the moment. Push harder and become an obstacle. Stay quiet and become complicit. She chose a third option. Run the contingency, she said, now, or you won't have the space to later. The leader hesitated, just long enough for doubt to ripple outward. Someone checked the feed again. Another operator frowned at his tablet. The relay came back online garbled, unreliable. The leader exhaled sharply. Contingency, he ordered. They adjusted, slowed, recentered. The rest of the exercise unfolded without incident. Afterward, the leader approached her outside, jaw tight. You undermined me. She met his gaze evenly. I supported the mission. You didn't trust the plan. I trusted the people, she said, enough to give them room to adapt. He stared at her for a long moment, then his shoulders dropped slightly. I didn't see it. No, she agreed. That's why teams exist. He nodded once, not gracious, but honest. That night Kira walked the perimeter alone, boots crunching softly against gravel. The stars were sharp overhead, unbothered by human effort. Her phone buzzed again. Merrick this time. You did well, you also made enemies. She smiled faintly. Both usually meant the same thing. The next day brought the unexpected. A real call, nearby unit, equipment failure during a routine movement, no hostile action, just bad luck and worse timing. They needed help coordinating recovery. Kira listened as the details came in, every instinct leaning forward. This wasn't her lane, not officially, but she understood the terrain, the patterns, the way small errors stacked when stress took over. She spoke carefully, offered insight without command, suggested spacing, timing, communication resets. It worked. Later, as the dust settled and the situation resolved, one of the younger operators approached her quietly. I froze, he admitted. For a second, I didn't know what to do. Kira nodded. Freezing isn't failure, staying there is. He looked at her, relief mixing with shame. How do you move past it? She thought of the mat, the notebook, the broken arm, the moments she wished she could rewrite. You acknowledge it, she said, then you act anyway. He absorbed that, thanked her, walked away straighter than he'd arrived. That night, she opened the notebook again. New entry. Leadership isn't being right first. It's being willing to slow down when everyone else is speeding up. The exercise concluded without further incident. Evaluations were written, lessons documented, names remembered. On the flight home, Kira rested her head against the window, watching the world blur beneath them. Exhaustion settled deep, the good kind, the kind that came from choosing presence over comfort. Back at her home base, the mat waited. So did the instructors, the students, the quiet work. But something had shifted. Not in how they looked at her, but in how they listened to each other. She saw it in the pauses before action, the checks that replaced assumptions, the hands that guided instead of forced. That was the change she had hoped for, the kind that didn't announce itself. Late one evening, as she locked up the training hall, she found the man with the once broken arm waiting near the door. They asked me to assist with the next cycle, he said, if you think I'm ready. She studied him, saw humility where certainty used to be. You are, she said. As she walked away, the echo of her steps felt different now, lighter, not because the weight was gone, but because it was shared. Sometimes redemption isn't a moment. It's a pattern. A series of small choices made quietly, consistently, without an audience. And as Kira stepped into the night, she understood something she hadn't before. Strength wasn't what brought her here. It was what she learned to restrain, so others could find their own. Why did it feel harder to walk away than it ever did to step forward? The hall was empty again, but this time the silence didn't judge her. It waited. Kira stood at the threshold, hand on the light switch, listening to the low hum of the building settling for the night. She could leave it dark. She could leave it exactly as it was, clean mats, aligned pads, the faint smell of effort still hanging in the air. A place designed to be used, not admired. She turned the lights off anyway. Outside, the evening carried a cooler edge, the kind that reminded you the day had been full and the night would be honest. She walked slowly, shoulder loose, stride unhurried, letting the ache in her body speak without answering it. Pain had become a language she understood. It told her when to stop, when to listen, when to choose. Her phone buzzed once more. A simple message, no rank, no ceremony. "Dinner tomorrow, V." She smiled, typed back, "Yes." It felt important to say yes now. Important to let people stand close without turning it into a lesson. The next morning arrived without drama. Coffee, briefings, familiar faces, new ones too. The next cycle assembled quietly, the way groups do when they've heard stories but haven't decided what to believe yet. Kira didn't begin with rules. She began with a pause. "Before we start," she said, voice calm, "I want to be clear about something. This space is for learning. That means mistakes will happen. If you hide them, you'll carry them alone. If you acknowledge them, we'll fix them together. No bravado. No warning. Just a truth placed gently on the table." They nodded, some skeptically, some with relief. Training unfolded the way real progress always does, unevenly. Breakthroughs came in quiet moments. A stance corrected, a grip softened, a breath taken at the right time instead of the fast one. She moved among them, adjusting, guiding, stepping back when needed, letting others lead when they could. Control wasn't about being central. It was about being present without crowding the outcome. Midday, a visitor arrived. Rear Admiral Merrick didn't announce himself. He stood near the wall, hands clasped, watching the way people moved when they didn't think they were being evaluated. That was where the truth lived. Kira noticed him only after the room had already changed, not because he was intimidating, but because attention had sharpened, awareness had lifted. She didn't stop the session. She let it speak. At the end, Merrick approached, eyes thoughtful. "They're different," he said. "They're listening to each other," Kira replied. He nodded. "That's harder to teach than technique." "Only if you try to teach it directly," she said. He studied her for a long moment. "There's talk of expanding this model, other units, other branches." She felt the familiar tightening, but this time it wasn't doubt. "Good," she said simply. That afternoon, she met Vaughn for dinner at a small place off base that didn't care who you were as long as you paid and didn't rush the tables. They sat outside, the sun slipping low, plates half finished between them. "You look tired," he said. "I am." "You look steady," he added. She considered that. "I feel aligned." He smiled. "That's rarer." They ate in companionable silence for a while. Then Vaughn spoke again, softer. "Your father would have liked what you built." Kira swallowed. He would have asked if it would last. "And I think it will," she said, "because it doesn't depend on me." Vaughn lifted his glass slightly. "That's how you know." Weeks passed, then months. The program grew, not in spectacle but in consistency. Injuries decreased, decision-making improved. After-action reviews sounded different, less blame, more clarity. Kira watched from the edges more often now, stepping in only when needed. The man with the once broken arm led a session on recovery under pressure. A younger instructor taught breath control the way he'd learned it, patient, precise, human. One evening, Kira found the notebook open on her desk, a page turned she didn't remember turning. Her father's handwriting again. If you're still here, it means you learned when not to fight. That might be the bravest thing you'll ever do. She closed the book gently. Later that night, the base was quieter than usual. A distant aircraft passed overhead, sound fading into memory. Kira walked the perimeter one last time before heading home, letting the rhythm of her steps set the pace of her thoughts. She stopped at the mat room window. Inside, a small group practiced without instruction, correcting each other with patience. No raised voices, no posturing, just work. She felt something loosen in her chest. This was what she had hoped for, not recognition, not authority, but continuity. A culture that could carry itself forward without demanding a name attached to it. The next morning, she submitted a request. Not for promotion, not for command, for a rotation. Time to observe, to learn from other units, to refine what she'd helped start and bring it back stronger. Leadership, she'd learned, wasn't a ladder, it was a loop. Merrick approved it without comment. On her last day before the rotation, the group gathered quietly. No speeches planned, no ceremony scheduled. Someone handed her a small box. Inside was a simple patch, no insignia, just a word stitched clean and small. Control. She looked up, surprised. It's not official, someone said, just what we call it. Kira nodded, emotion pressing close but not spilling. She slipped the patch into her pocket. I didn't give you this, she said. You built it. They stood there for a moment, the weight of shared effort settling into something like pride, but quieter, truer. As she walked away, bag slung over her shoulder, she felt the familiar ache and welcomed it. A reminder of cost, of care, of choices made deliberately. Strength would always matter. So would skill. So would courage. But she had learned something deeper, something she wished she'd known earlier. That dignity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand space. It doesn't need witnesses. Sometimes dignity waits. Sometimes it absorbs the hit. Sometimes it chooses restraint when force would be easier. And in that choice, quiet, controlled, and human, the world shifts just enough for others to stand taller. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.